I have immense admiration for Sony's first-party lineup. Horizon Zero Dawn, Bloodborne, God of War, The Last of Us, Spider-Man, Neo 2, Persona 5, and Uncharted 4 are all decade-defining games for me. While infamous Second Son may not be quite that caliber, Sucker Punch's previous hits have always flown close to those heights. Their ambitious undertaking to punctuate Sony's reign of quality in Ghost of Tsushima had my hopes high they would finally reach that upper echelon. Critically, the game was mildly divisive. If metascores are your thing, it ranks as the kind of B-tier effort that most of their history falls into. Fans, on the other hand, are universally praising Tsushima. No matter what corner of the internet I peek into, I find almost unanimous love for the samurai-infused take on the open-world experience. A collective cry of masterpiece, thrusting Sucker Punch into Sony's A-tier limelight. This is an opinion I do not share, not because of the OB's bouncy ball. That's hilarious. To be frank, as of writing this introduction, I don't know what to think of the game. There are a couple of things I adore, plenty of middling issues, and a handful of things I strongly dislike. The scope of this expansive style of game makes it difficult to filter down a single focused sentence that describes my exact feelings. Instead, I'm gonna piece my take together bit by bit in divided sections. I'll timestamp each in the description so you can skip around as you like, and ultimately score each on a scale from exceptional to pure garbage. Pressed for my strongest positive takeaway from Tsushima, it's hands down their gorgeous presentation. On a surface level, while this may not be the most graphically impressive game of all time, it has a strong case as the most beautiful ever made. The title drop is aptly preceded by Sucker Punch Presents. The swelling music as you break through the tree line to see the mesmerizing landscape was a breathtaking blow. What a brilliant way to introduce the player to an open world. This feast for the eyes immediately charges your brain with excitement at the prospect of exploring its depth. The extent of environmental depth throughout your journey is spectacular. From the pale tundras of frame skies so blue they could wash over you, to scorched earth expanses oozing despair, to mountain views overlooking plains bursting with color, to flat marshes that play a subdued backdrop to stand out world activities, to flowy grassy fields that embrace your entry into Tsushima. The sheer awe inspired by every inch of the island never wavered for a second of my journey. The soothing immersion brought on by its beauty is assisted by minimal HUD elements and the guiding wind system. In lieu of a mini-map, you can summon a gust of wind blowing towards your objective with the press of a button. Less time staring at an objective marker means more time soaking in the lavish landscapes. You still need a map to point the wind at an objective, but this is a notable step forward for immersion and exploration. You can even allow the wind to guide you toward branching categories of world activities with no actual map marker, in addition to golden birds you can follow that swoop toward unmarked locations. It's great for completionists and natural world immersion. My only complaint of this system is how it operates as a crutch for less intuitive environmental design. The cost of overloading scenery with lush detail is distracting you from important locations within it. It took me quite a while to notice that certain activities had actual indicators. For example, fox dens have trees with fireflies fluttering around them. Even with this knowledge, many are lost amidst busy views that obscure them. Question marks on your map can lead you there, but this forces you into the immersion-breaking pause screen for guidance. I found myself chasing question marks more frequently than naturally seeking my next objective. Ironic, because many missions force you to survey for strategic advantages. A similar feature could have been implemented into higher peaks across the map. Rather than devolving into the off-malign Ubisoft Tower, the organic mountains, cliffs, marshes, and low plains could allow players to survey from these spots and plan X marks for a guiding gust of your design. The game does allow you to create pins via the map screen, but my suggestion is to diminish reliance on it even further. In terms of more straightforward presentation elements, I have to praise the mission title sequences. The framing makes superb use of the world's eye candy. The bookends add a sense of excitement and finality with an audible punch, with subtle context layered in. Take this mission with Lady Sanjo. An intimidating figurehead in the seedy Umagi Cove, Jin questions her sincerity when she seeks his help. Her response is to ask the last man that questioned her integrity out back. As you accept the mission, the title cuts to that man's head on a spike. It's a merciless contrast to the lady's polite demeanor, characterization told through clever direction. Inspired by legendary filmmaker Akira Kurosawa, the game's presentation doesn't hide its cinematic motivations. At the slightest hint of dialogue, black bars slide into the frame. At first, this shift was jarring, especially during mid-mission dialogue. After the initial hours, though, the transition felt more seamless. Their efforts to turn the average cutscene into shots out of a Kurosawa epic is commendable. The setting settings, effect, and especially shot choices are expertly done. Those elements go much farther in achieving a cinematic atmosphere than slapping black bars on the screen, even if their usage is largely inoffensive. The cinematic value is enhanced greatly by an excellent score. Appropriately subdued during exploration, the incredible composition is on full display during emotional story peaks. It makes rich use of Japanese instruments and musical stylings that are perfect for the setting. All around, an outstanding production. My feelings on the voice acting are more mixed. Though I can't flawlessly judge a language I can't speak, the cadence, inflection, tone, and varied volumes from gentle conversation to combat cries were masterfully done in Japanese.
怒りを抑えろ。人殺しになりたいか、こやつのように。我らは武士だ。
ですがお重よ。罪人はその命をもって償わせねば。
目をそらすな。怒りや恐れで人を殺めてはならん。誉れを胸に。なのです。民を恐れさせるだけだ。その道を歩み続ければお前もけだものになるぞ。誉れある戦いを忘れるな。誉れは浜で死にました。
Unfortunately, the performances are undermined through lip sync matched to English audio. You can of course opt for the English dub.
If you continue down this path, you will be no better than the Mongols. I trained you to fight with honor.
Honor died on the beach. The Khan deserves to suffer.
It's a serviceable effort that I'm glad is available for those who want it, but it isn't my preference in an ancient Japanese setting. I can understand why a Western studio would lip sync their dialogue to their largest market. I also understand how resource intensive it would be to animate dialogue for both languages. Nevertheless, it was an immersion breaker throughout my experience that detracted from otherwise fantastic performances. Overall, animation is similarly divisive. Combat is rich with intentional force and impressive precision throughout various stances. No matter where each lands on a spectrum of finesse to power, the attention to detail in footwork, body language, swift movement, combination of slices, and enemy responses blend to create an electrifying flow. The horseback animations were mostly great, with the exception of rare herky-jerk movement. The platforming more often hits those janky notes with you flying around like a superhuman magnet. NPC running animations are laughable once you notice they're all sped up versions of the same exact animation across every NPC. It's one of those things you can't unsee once you've seen it. While you might excuse animation shortcuts in a game of this size, noticing these details in a play session is an unwelcome immersion breaker. But nothing smashes that illusion harder than glitches. I am the broom that sweeps up what remains, which is especially easy when your targets are short-circuiting. Ghost of Tsushima stealth in action or broken AI? Let's see. Bop, bop. Oh, I kickstarted his brain. Bop. What's so funny, Norio? Well, if it's worth repeating the same exact soundbite of laughter, then this I gotta see. Oh. That is pretty funny. Thanks, pal, I'll keep that in mind. What have you got for us? Now you listen here, you little Even thinks I praise having consistencies. After this title drop, I'm greeted by a frame half full of horse ass. As the camera pans out to what I assume was meant to be a perspective shot, we instead shift to the horror genre. Apparently it traumatized Gene so much that he'll no longer pet horses, because you are definitely not touching that pony. Potato brain captains sprinting into walls, hefty boys bouncing in an infinitely looping trampoline, and whatever the hell you want to call this unsettling sight. Nothing beats the piece de glitchistance my fiance found. Excuse my unsightly filmography that makes boomers with an iPhone look like Steven Spielberg, but I had to catch this candid gem spur of the moment. Somehow, stepping off a rock glued Gene's hands to his pants, swinging the blade like a sharp dong, challenging his enemies to tango with it. Even trying to fall off cover to correct the issue was no match for the power of pocket stance. Outside of this one requiring a hard reset to resolve, were any of these glitches game-breaking? No. Were they hilarious? Absolutely. Were they immersion-breaking? Of course. The variety of bugs is impressive, and while entertaining, it's at the expense of the intended presentation. Further cracks in an otherwise phenomenally directed game. In spite of its shortcomings, the overall presentation is just that. Phenomenal. The collective showcase is so remarkable that it outweighs the handful of hiccups. It is unequivocally my favorite aspect of the game, earning an exceptional grade on today's scale. Presentation alone is arguably enough to justify a strong recommendation. When considering what you'll actually be playing though, the rich world is bursting with thematically appropriate activities. Collectibles make up the largest majority of these time sinks. Open world games often default to cramming in more trinkets than you'll ever care to collect, providing the illusion the world is full of worthwhile things to do. There are piles of pointless artifacts and records scattered widely with little value outside of admiring digital recreations of ancient relics. They're equally matched in number by cosmetic scabbards, masks, hats, and headbands. These are at least compelling for fashionistas, but I found the dozen mild variations on a mask to be unnecessary bloat. The only superb element of collection are the headbands. At serene locations, you get to craft haiku through predetermined lines that will adorn your headband's description. There's no aesthetic change, but I appreciated the peaceful reflection on elements of the human experience. The variety of color and designs is commendable, but their value quickly wears thin. I settled into fashion I liked early on, so by the third act, I was groaning every time a bird led me to my 15th straw hat, or a question mark revealing a reskinned scabbard. Despite brief shades of quality, most collectibles exist as inconsequential ways to pad out the runtime. The game's upgrade activities offer more direct value, but become even more needless in the grand scheme. Hot Springs provide a bee's dick increase in HP, Fox Shrines initially offer vital charm slots, but eventually devolve into long chases across nearly 50 shrines for OP charms with no difficult content to necessitate them. Shinto shrines exist to highlight underwhelming cinematic platforming with dismal complexity. They provide genuinely valuable buffs, but once you've got a few good ones, the rest become progressively lackluster. At least bamboo strikes are succinct, and entertaining tests of dexterity that provide a perpetually important prize. These activities feel special in the initial hours, but devolve into increasingly meaningless bullet points on a checklist as the collectathon drags on, especially when the main quest rewards you with more than enough overpowered armor, upgrades, and buffs to be a wrecking ball. The transparency of these activities existing to stretch out the implied value of the game in a quantity over quality way is maddening. It's a blunt reminder of Tsushima's over-reliance on tiresome open world tropes. Instead of filling your world with a wide diversity of compelling activities, you chose to copy-paste a handful of near-identical objectives across the world as a patchwork way to make the world appear full. I'm well aware you can dabble in these activities to whatever degree you can tolerate them, but that's the problem right there. I shouldn't be arguing over tolerance of what is a vital portion of your open world experience. It's repetitive, lazy, and serves the exact opposite of the intended purpose. It devalues the game the longer it goes on. The weakest of these tasks involves collecting crickets from unmarked graveyards for new recorder songs or finding 8 lighthouses for a minuscule experience increase. There's at least charm to following foxes or reflecting on your journey in soothing waters. These are glorified collectibles with dismal rewards. The real benefit should be how enjoyable these activities are. Whatever initial entertainment value they offer burns to nothing in the later hours. The only activity that stands the test of time are Mongol camp raids. I never once found myself eye-rolling in any of the 60+ camps across the game's 3 provinces. Structural assets are shamelessly recycled, but they're at least reconfigured in unique ways with thoughtful enemy placement, hostage scenarios, and heavy artillery to keep the formula fresh. Their lack of mission restrictions makes them arguably the finest playground to highlight the strengths of combat and stealth. Without a story driving exploration, Ghost of Tsushima falls into the same repetitive traps as its contemporaries. Instead of pushing the boundaries of the open world formula, it's a frustrating rehash of exhausting design philosophies. The opportunity cost of wasting time running down their lackluster to-do list is stark against games with a tighter focus around what they do best. That's what developers need to consider. You've already got my money. What you're competing for is my time, a painfully limited resource. If you want me to spend it in your world, you'll have to do better than littering below average activities throughout it like mundane wildfire. To their credit, the side tales are a substantial leap in quality. The Mongol invasion backdrop provides an excellent setting for intimate stories with high stakes already built in. The game is at its best when it lets you act out a romanticized version of a samurai, helping common folk resolve disputes, providing protection, and acting as a sword of justice is the highlight of this samurai simulation. The writing in these one-off character arcs has variable quality centered around well-tread tropes, but there are a handful of emotionally gripping standouts, all of which add much needed characterization to Gene and the society he wants to save. The gameplay structure of these tales falls flat in comparison. Most can be boiled down to a mixture of the following: long sections of walkie-talkie, tailing a VIP along a path so easy it practically plays itself, investigating a few objects by pressing a single button, and listening to Gene piece together how we'll inevitably track footsteps until you reach another point of interest. This could be more investigations, more talking, for stealth or combat. This blend of elements becomes painfully noticeable in the opening hours and never evolved over the 60 side missions I played. The dialogue's quality is inconsistent, tailing VIPs is mind-numbingly dull, a take the game appears to agree with, because losing your target by taking a non-optimal route will spawn you in a prime location with no progress lost. It's as if the game wants to hold your hand to end the suffering as fast as possible. If they're so terrible that they play themselves, why not remove them? The investigative aspects are derivatives ripped straight from The Witcher 3. There's no interactive elements outside of pressing a button to be awarded with more walking. How about you let players inspect objects and draw their own conclusions? Let us be right or wrong and create dynamic consequences. If Mongols kidnapped a family, allow my investigative success or failure to determine their survival. This would add gameplay depth and complexity to mission structure that relies on your ability. Instead, you're on rails over a predetermined, predictable path. The stories that tie it together can mask the monotonous structure, but it doesn't repair the fixed tracks you follow. It's a strange disconnect for a game that gives ample freedom outside of missions. The only missions that flex Sucker Punch's creative chops are the mythic quests. Remember my request for environmental cues to guide the player? Some mythics use bold flower colors in a wide area to lead you on a treasure hunt, with picture scrolls and a wide search area as your only hints. Another mission gives cinematic platforming actual stakes with a time limit to reach fires before Gene freezes atop a mountain. Others integrate into world activities with cinematic duels and hostage raids. Less creative since they're copies of things that already exist, but at least they flow into the world naturally. In line with world activities, the mission structure is overly simplistic and formulaic. Design decisions required with a quantity over quality philosophy. The game is stuffed with so many tales that it would have been a Herculean task to give them all a unique flavor. The dull structure can be a canvas to paint stories on, and though the writing is often great, I wish they had the gameplay to match. Mythic quests and highlights during character-driven missions show Sucker Punch had the potential. Sadly, their design philosophy bogs down those heights into average structure that could have been so much more. A key element I've skirted around is combat. Its importance in the gameplay loop definitely deserves dedicated attention. Many reviews I've seen focus more on what Tsushima resembles instead of what it actually presents. Yes, you strike with a katana and parry enemy blows. Does that make it anything like Sekiro's posture-based system with a give-and-take hit deflect rhythm instead of parrying for openings to enemy health? No! Comparing Sekiro deflections to Tsushima parries is apples and oranges. Their only similarity is they require adept reflexes, something all action games reward. The same could be said for stances. Comparison to Neo ignore the different combos, key costs, dodge and attack speed, strength, etc. that define those stances. Tsushima's system is more like rock, paper, scissors, moon responses to enemy weaknesses. Comparisons to Batman Arkham make sense with the swooping to enemies and classic Assassin's Creed with the mash and counter style, both offering tools to disorient the flow of battle. Your comparable ghost tools are broken. Kunai are tossed in multiples, do sizable damage, stun enemies, and are unleashed almost instantly. Powder bombs hit hard and knock enemies down for instant kill opportunities. Sticky bombs are homing stun tools. Smoke bombs allow free re-stealth for chain assassinations mid-combat. A panic button with zero downside. The only balance is that you have a limited stock. Those reserves are more than enough to finish any single encounter though, with tools easily replenished from the Fallen. As overpowered as they may be, I rarely made use of them. Triangle spam to victory is all you need. That quad Rochambeau system operates around sword, shield, spear, and brute enemies having corresponding stances that do bonus stagger damage. Once you break stagger, most enemies are dead right there. High-ranking enemies may survive, but it's not difficult to keep spamming triangle. The stagger attacks are heavy, causing enemy recoil. This is more than enough time to keep stringing them together safely. Enemy numbers are the only added complexity, a complication easily remedied by an attentive eye and pressing L1 during the generous parry window, or all of the OP ghost tools that I mentioned. Archers also divert attention, but it's laughably easy to sprint around slaughtering them at the beginning of every encounter. Or just slow time and shoot them yourself. Heck, do it to anyone you like. The defining combat mechanic are standoffs. With a bold shout, you get a stare down to start an encounter. Enemies faint in progressively more complex ways, with the goal being patience to release triangle as they attack. That provides boatloads of resolve, especially when you upgrade a slice through up to 5 enemies in a row. Resolve is needed for combat abilities and healing, so it's not only satisfying but rewarding. Parries and kills also reward resolve, giving you a constant influx for good performance. The cost of failing a standoff is missing the resolve reward and a heavy blow to HP. The aforementioned complexities keep this mechanic engaging until the very end. Though it is easily my favorite element of combat, I have one major gripe. Lord Adachi and Khotun Khan have a culture-defining difference in war tactics put on display in the opening cutscene. Adachi proudly represents the samurai of Tsushima as their finest warrior and asks the Mongols to show the same respect. As he lists off his accolades, Khan tosses wine and a torch to light him ablaze. It shows a clear disregard for honorable combat traditions, something Khan openly admits that he uses against them. So why is every soldier in his army happily compliant with your request for a showdown when they outnumber you? You can't tell me there isn't a single member of his entire army that wouldn't resort to tactics their leader enforces. It's a missed opportunity to add depth to feints. Mix in soldiers that throw wine canteens at you. If you don't dodge with circle, enemies use flame weapons to do double damage throughout the entire battle. It's fun enough that I just accept the missed opportunity and baffling story disconnect, but it's still a notable downside. The dodgeable attacks that do come into play are more troublesome than terrific. Using the face buttons to attack requires you to quickly reposition your grip to evade, whereas parrying is comfortably mapped to L1. You get upgrades to allow deflecting most of these attacks, and spamming triangle stops them in their tracks, so it is minor in the grand scheme. Combat starts relatively simple, with the difficulty curve hopelessly outpaced by your numerous tools and upgrades. There are some extremely strong abilities you get through the story and mythic quests that I'll refrain from spoiling, but suffice it to say that despite decent balance in how often you can use them, their cost is well paid and enemy obliteration with zero risk. Duels ooze the same delightful presentation I praise heartily, with well-paced openings to build tension and jaw-dropping effects. Sadly, they are all basic enemies with a few new differentiated attacks. The few unique attacks they have are shared across duels, making even those feel like a retread. They do resolve the stagger problem. You can't just win by mashing triangle. Instead, just parry and hit a few times, rinse and repeat. The combat system is overly simplistic and bloated in favor of your overwhelming advantageous options. The intangible qualifier is entertainment. Despite the low challenge and depth, it's a blast being an unstoppable force that only grows more devastating the longer you play. Your vast options are completely unfair toward the hordes you slaughter, but their availability allows creativity and fun to flourish. Enemy variety changes enough to prevent execution from growing too stale. The quad Rochambeau system keeps you engaged. Ghost tools work as a flashy pocket sand to hilarious effect. The resolve system adds a solid wrinkle to punish repeated mistakes. The flashy endgame abilities have a reasonable cost to utilize them, and though duels aren't completely unique, they are framed brilliantly as a cut above the standard fare. With more depth and difficulty balance, this could have been an excellent combat system. Instead, it leans much closer to the average, thanks in large part to the immense entertainment in its execution. Comparatively, stealth is steaming hot booty cheeks. The AI in this game is brain dead. You can slam a katana into a screaming guard from a 20-foot roof, and guards within reasonable earshot carry on none the wiser. The common trope of underdeveloped stealth mechanics in games is rampant: the magical stealth grass. Bows can snipe enemies with time-slowing shots with no risk. You later obtain stealth armor that makes enemy detection rates even more abysmal. Wind chimes and firecrackers bait enemies for chain assassinations with ease. There's even a charm that turns chimes into insta-kill poison traps. You can swap charms at any time for zero cost, so there's no reason not to use that broken option. Even if stealth was executed well, which it's not, it's a boring sidetrack to a game with such entertaining combat. Why would I ever want to waste an opportunity to become Samurai Batman Auditore through standoffs and scrambles? I can't even give it credit for providing another way to play. Its existence undermines combat, especially when you're forced to use stealth. Imagine if they had spent less time planting magical grass and spreading enemies in easy to navigate routes along camps, and instead focus all that effort on developing a deeper combat system. More options makes balancing a game more challenging, an element this game sorely lacks. This is one of the least enjoyable stealth experiences I've ever had. It only gets credit for being functional, something that doesn't save it from being boring. It's left as a below average compliment to a middling combat system begging for more attention. I know many who watch this channel care about rewarding challenging games. I'll state outright that I rarely prefer games with difficulty options over curated experiences. When you develop a game with a single level of challenge in mind, it forces the player to adapt and overcome carefully crafted scenarios. Tinkering with a slider often band-aids games that are too easy or hard by tweaking enemy damage and aggression, then calling it a day. When we're talking about a 30 to 50 hour game, there's no way that can account for the balance in every situation. You either end up steamrolling the game or getting frustrated over difficulty that feels tuned in an unfair and therefore unsatisfying way. In my experience on normal, this game was mind-numbingly easy. Even when I switched it to hard, most fights pale in comparison to your toolkit. Efforts to add more damage, aggression, and alter parry windows without curating situations to work with those changes in a clever way is futile. Your abilities in combat outpace any effort to introduce more difficult enemy types. The duels offer moderate challenge, but are embarrassed by legendary abilities and decent reflexes. The stealth assassinates any difficulty out of existence, allowing you to shave enemy numbers from an already half-baked combat challenge. Instead of tuning sliders as a band-aid, how about you add greater enemy variety? Introduce some immunities to certain ghost tools that force you to adapt. Mix them intentionally with difficult configurations on higher difficulties that limit your options. You could even intuitively decide which immunities to introduce based on player statistics. If I rely too much on a few tools, nullify them by introducing immune enemies and force me to make full use of my expansive arsenal. I want more to be asked of me as a player in an interesting way, and that's something Tsushima rarely has to offer. Even so, I don't think the game's low challenge is all bad. While depth is sorely lacking, power trips can be fun in the right context. While combat hits those notes surprisingly well in the face of my complaints, stealth is dog shit for difficulty. It balances out to below average execution that could have been so much more with curated care in its design. I've referenced character progression a few times without specific detail. Allow me to be concise. I enjoy the game rewarding you for playing what it has to offer. Every activity, despite their varied repetition, rewards you with consistent progression towards your legend, or at least provides an equal reward. Your legend offers upgrades through experience points that shape the OP kits that I've mentioned. Gear upgrades, on the other hand, are based around materials you collect. I greatly appreciate how reined in their variety is. All weapons are upgraded with iron, steel, and gold. All bows are upgraded with bamboo, yew wood, and waxwood. All armor is upgraded with linen, leather, and silk. This simplicity works well for the game's large scope and keeps focus away from dull minutia. Yet supplies, the overarching currency all upgrades require, forces you to strategically choose what to upgrade first. You'll eventually have enough to upgrade everything with diligent exploration, but this initial scarcity shapes the early hours differently based on your priorities. Though I may dislike the repeated prevalence of many world activities, I can commend the intention of letting character progression come naturally through the world. It's an exceptional element that would have been even better if those lacking features were improved. From here on out, we're entering spoiler territory as I discuss my final point of interest, the narrative. If you'd like to avoid spoils, skip to my overall impressions timestamped on the screen in 3, 2, Forgive me for those of you who haven't played the story, but I'm skipping the recap pleasantries to get right to the point. Jin Sakai is a sociopath. His character arc exhibits erratic behavior that can only be explained by cognitive dissonance to a baffling degree. I'm explorative Jin Sakai. I'm a conduit for the player to live out their fantasies of exploring the island's beauty with no character to speak of. I'm side mission Jin Sakai. I embody the honorable code of the romanticized samurai. A hero who protects those who can't defend themselves and carries out the righteous will of those who cannot fight. I'm character mission Jin Sakai. I like to preach what I inconsistently practice to my peers, all the while requesting their help and expecting them to remain complicit in my questionable main story actions, which they will, because they're glorified sidekicks outside of their own spotlight. I'm Act 1 Jin Sakai. I begrudgingly move around the limits of a samurai's honor to do what it takes to save my uncle, a man I believe can turn the tide of the invasion. I'm Act 2 Jin Sakai. I poison. 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 It's the perfect weapon. Exploring the world with Jean is a tranquil experience with a fair share of dull moments. The beauty of the side missions comes not from playing out heroic fantasies, but exploring your failure. Side missions result in mistakes, loss, and betrayal, resulting in emotional turmoil. Jean's ability to maintain composure and a balanced sense of morality and justice is inspiring. It causes the weak to help in whatever way they safely can. Character missions have an added layer to that formula due to their comparable strength to Jean. Their backstories and motivations are compelling. On equal footing with Jean, they're able to philosophically debate differing perspectives on morality and justice that challenge his beliefs. Archer Sensei is a failed teacher whose only redemption can be found through killing his traitorous student. The arc shows the humanity of this supposed monster, despite the atrocities she commits. She did what she could to stay alive, even if those actions would be deemed immoral by most. She's responsible for more Japanese deaths than most Mongols you slaughter, and yet Jean and Sensei let her escape. This whole arc has Jean and Sensei pointing fingers at who will be too soft to kill Tomoe, and in the end they both are. Lady Misako loses everything. Her husband's life and dignity, her sons, their wives, daughters, grandchildren. Not even a newborn is spared from a mystery conspirator's vengeance. It's abundantly clear that death is the only justice she is willing to consider, a revenge tour leading to her sister as the mastermind. Misako may not strike the final blow, but she's the arbiter of death to the final family member she has left. Despite constant objections to these brutal actions, Jean exhibits immense patience with her temper, even excusing her attempt at his own life when he protects a monk he believes to be innocent. Unless pushed, he's passive to her will. The same cannot be said for Norio. He admires Jean's heroism to an unhealthy degree. Jean's interventions in his story often result in loss and failure, but his resolve to not give in inspires Norio. Jean's heinous actions as the ghost shatter Norio's restraint after witnessing his brother's grim fate. A broken man, he burns and tortures an entire Mongol camp like an emotionless demon. Despite Jean's clear disdain for Norio's darkness, he throws it out the window. What's done is done. Don't quit being a monk, it's totally okay. No one in the Temple of Monks will fear your burning, murderous rage. Meanwhile, Norio is like, bro, are you kidding me? I'm a monster. No, don't say that. How will I rationalize my own actions? Yuna. From start to finish, she's the devil on Jean's shoulder. She turns the samurai epic into the Assassin's Creed derivative Bushido Code. Those 4 spits of stealth I mentioned, a lion's share of it involves Yuna. She encourages you to assassinate targets. Her character missions are centered on callous ways of taking vengeance that twist justice into torture. There is an interesting angle to her character beneath that transparent toxicity. Her less privileged life forces her into horrible circumstances that make her thievery seem tame. But her retaliations are so malicious that it's hard to agree with. Jean constantly saves the less fortunate from similar circumstances and passes judgment on criminals with honor in the side missions. It's confusing how Yuna's presence poisons the waters within him enough to use it as a toxic force against the main story enemies, especially when you consider his admiration for Lord Shimura. A pillar of honor under shogunate rule, Lord Shimura is Jean's initial ideal. The entire first act is based around his rescue, with Jean asserting that he will singularly turn the tide of the invasion. You see it instantly. He's a natural-born leader with gravitational charisma and talent in combat. Lord Shimura's stubborn attachment to the samurai custom and shackle to the shogunate are his stark flaws. He loves Jean, but can only accept him into his family as a samurai with honor. It's clear that Jean adores his uncle, but disagrees with the rigidity of his code. Shimura's stifling one-dimensional outlook makes him predictable to Khan, forcing Jean to eventually take matters into the ghost's hands. There's a common theme in these relationships. Jean's moral compass points in whatever direction is situationally convenient. He spares Tomoe despite her committing atrocities worse than most Mongols because she atones to her master, a man you need on your side. He follows Misako's murderous path with frequent complaints but never true disagreement because he needs her help. Norio's psyche completely crumbles. Jean responds with a friendly slap on the ass and tells him to chin up, move on like nothing happened, because he needs him. It isn't until his morality is pit between 2 black and white perspectives that he's forced to forsake someone. And how does he do that? This mission has a harsh disconnect between gameplay and narrative. It forced me to use stealth, so I chose the lesser of two evils and tried to silently put enemies out of their misery rather than poison them. The game respawned them in infinite numbers to force me to carry out Jean's twisted tactics. He and Yuna's pillow talk about forcing the enemy to vomit themselves to death is gross, but it's not like Shimura is blameless. His inability to adapt to the enemy's unforgiving flexibility is selfish at the expense of foot soldier lives. At the same time, you have to consider, is it worth forfeiting assimilating your society if you forfeit what your culture values to do so? There is obviously a middle ground here, but the game isn't willing to explore it. Instead, Jean sides with Yuna's toxic lust for enemy suffering to an insane degree. In a game with incredible options in combat, freedom in exploration, and philosophically complex one-off tales, it's frustrating how stifling the main story is. You're forced into stealth regularly in a world that favors open battle. Battle that, might I add, is plenty effective against enemy hordes in numerous main missions. You opt for unnecessary toxic tools when your pre-existing arsenal is proven to be more than enough. Instead of challenging the absurd extremes of Yuna and Shimura, you double down despicably. Why Jean defaults to Yuna's sadistic whims is never explained. He wastes multiple opportunities to have an open conversation with Shimura about tactics, in lieu of staying in line until the heat of battle, when it's far too late to debate politics and strategy. And in the end, he decides through contrived writing to forsake his honor and embraces the worst parts of the Ghost. The skeleton of good storytelling is there. Sucker Punch could have delivered the rise to the Ghost in a compelling way, but missed the mark at every turn. A studio that spent the last decade developing black and white narratives with choice constructed a similar tale with no agency. The stark contrast between Samurai and Ghost had room for depth through player choice. Give us the opportunity to go the stubborn way of the Samurai. Let us plunge into the legend of the Ghost and the brutal chaos it brings. Or allow us to do the most logical thing, a combination of everything in between. Because that's what I did in gameplay. I was a rogue samurai using Ghost tactics as a situational backbone to strong swordsmanship. It matched my moral compass that was as good as war would allow it to be. I never relished violence, revenge, or fantasies full of enemies choking on their own blood. Moments like these would have had actual impact if choices you made drove you into a position where this was necessary. Player agency would have created lasting consequences of your own making that alienate different allies. The resulting fallout could have been reflected in dynamic ways through a branching narrative and world. Instead of preaching about what is and isn't right, then forcibly favoring a singular route, one that can be incongruent with the way the player shapes their own experience outside of the story, why not offer flexibility? It's not like you didn't consider it. In the end, you had a gut punch in battling Lord Shimura at the Sakai graveyard. No matter how poorly the story was presented, the range of emotions Shimura goes through in these final moments brought a tear to my eye. But not Jean, this sociopath who takes advantage of those around him to carry out his disgusting selfish whims for what he believes is the greater good garners no respect from me. The singular choice in the end to honor Lord Shimura through a warrior's death or let him go and embrace ghosthood felt empty. I finally get an opportunity to lean closer to the honor I wanted all along at the expense of a man I should have had an open conversation with ages ago to avoid this mess, or leave him alive to forsake his values and put the final nail in his coffin of respect for Jean. I can't imagine how much grander this would have felt as a punctuation to a journey shaped by my own choices. In fact, I'd do it the total opposite way. Give me choices throughout the game and have this be the ending that occurs when you go Ghost. Take away this choice in the final moment and force me to leave Shimura alive. A last smack to his honor that cements your ghostly path. The opposite could have had you become a puppet of the shogunate. The middle route, and undoubtedly the hardest to achieve, being one where you manage to band everyone together against a real enemy, not through honor, swordsmanship, subterfuge, or assassination, but conversation, compromise, and unity. Because let's be real, getting these extreme caricatures to get along would have been the toughest feat to achieve. I haven't even mentioned idiotic moments like Jean allowing Taka, Yuna's brother who is untrained in combat, someone as weak as the peasants Jean protects dozens of times, lure a horde of Mongols away to his ultimate demise. As if being a blacksmith doesn't have value in war, and fighting is the only way to prove your worth. I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't do it to keep Yuna around since he insists he needs her despite being more than capable on his own. And you gotta love Jean's plot armor whenever he does falter. He somehow gets carried off a beach when he should have died. Khan chucks him off a bridge instead of stabbing him. He survives that fall into the water with a height that would turn it effectively into concrete. Most egregiously, his plot armor doesn't extend to my horse. He could have easily escaped without the horse, but instead he selfishly opts to hop aboard with an eye line of numerous archers. Then he rides that workhorse into its literal grave. At least you honor his sacrifice by burying an entire horse with your bare hands. Don't even get me started on soaking in a hot spring with sloppy seconds in the background while I get an option to reflect on my dead horse. Where was the plot armor for his ass? I could ramble on about issues I have with the narrative all day, but it won't drive my point home any more effectively at this point. There's absolutely moments of merit in the overall narrative experience, especially the individual tales, and few emotional highs that do land well. But the contrived writing, irrational behavior, over-reliance on tropes, and lack of choice in a game begging for it bogs down the narrative into a below-average effort that borders on garbage in its worst hours. All things considered equal, Ghost of Tsushima is an inconsistent experience that shines bright in some areas like presentation and character progression, has combat difficulty, mission structure, and world activities that are begging for more depth, while core elements like stealth and story are lackluster to a near garbage degree. The presentation, while not absent of flaws, is so spectacular overall that I stand by my initial conclusion. This game is worth punching a ticket for that alone. Just know that while Sucker Punch's love letter to samurai epics is superficially magnificent, beneath that beauty lies a mess of execution. My take is a lot more mild than most, so I'm really excited to hear your take on Ghost of Tsushima and my impressions of it. I genuinely hope you enjoyed this game more than I did and feel like it's a masterpiece like so many others out there do. Until then, I want to thank you for watching today, much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.